God, that this show was amazing. Okay, so for those who don't know, I am a Spider-Man fan. I'm honestly surprised, if you don't know that, given the fact that I'm pretty sure I mentioned it a lot since I've been on the internet. Um, anyway, so Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man just wrapped up, and I figured maybe it's time I finally make a review on something after saying I would with that first video. When it was still being marketed, I remember everyone saying the show was gonna suck. Now, usually there were some good criticisms, like the voice acting, the animation. The trailers made it look very generic and safe for a Spider-Man thing. And of course, while those criticisms are valid, there were the others. While I can't agree with many of the things said about the show, especially the comments made about how woke it was, because Jesus Christ, if that's your only criticism you have towards something just because there happens to be people of color and LGBTQ plus people in it, in changes to the source material, that makes sense because it's literally an alternate universe of the MCU. Your media literacy is in the trash, and please reevaluate your life choices. Please touch grass and know that no woman will ever want to fuck you. Thank you. I can agree with the criticism about the voice acting, however. Now, a lot of the voice actors in the show are really good. Dare I say, extremely good, especially Coleman Domingo, the VA for Norman Osborn. And I think I speak for most of us when I say,
Feige! Make Coleman Domingo the MCU Norman Osborn, and my life is yours.
but I can't say every actor is great, especially the main man himself, Peter Parker. Hudson Thames is fine. He's fine. Every time I hear him, instead of making Spider-Man his own, he's very much set, or maybe required to do, a very weird Tom Holland impression. And the thing is, listening to his voice and behind the scenes things, he has a young enough voice to be the character. Why is he making himself sound like Tom Holland? It just comes off as weird and off-putting in a lot of different ways than it should. Some of the other characters also have weird voices. Aunt May is the opposite. Instead, she sounds too different from her IRL counterpart, but I would have been fine with that if she wasn't putting off this weird fake queen accent the entire time. It's one of my biggest issues with Marvel animation projects that are set in an MCU adjacent universe. It's basically, instead of having these VAs, some of who are really good and have shown that they can play really cool characters, instead make them do some shoddy impression of the MCU character, and it kind of ruins some of the moments. Also, maybe consider recasting Peter for season 2, because the actor might be a bad person. Just a thought. Another criticism I think I have is not the animation itself, that's not the problem, it's the art style, and the lack of lighting within it. The show looks very much like a comic book. Like, extremely like one, and that kinda hurts it. There are certain scenes that look incredible, and the lighting services the look the creator is going for, but a lot of the shots, including ones within places like schools or office buildings, the lighting is extremely flat, borderline making the show look worse. In a lot of scenes, everything is extremely bland and boring, and unfortunately, instead of this only being a lot of the time, it's nearly every scene. So I understand why the criticism the animation alone, and that being the reason most people aren't watching it. I get it. For me, it was definitely a hurdle I had to get used to. I understand that a 3D TV show is going to look a bit rough in a lot of ways, and I understand it's probably a budget reason than anything else. I get it. I'm not saying I can do better with the budget or with no budget. I can't draw for shit. I'm just saying it looks a bit rough. Maybe it'll look better as it goes. Also, like I said, there's specific times of day and moments in the show where the style looks amazing. It's mostly a lighting issue. So simply set the whole show in the afternoon and at night, and that'll fix the problem. It's obvious I'm kidding, right? And look, this is probably the best a 3D Spider-Man cartoon has ever looked. I mean, anything is better than the...
Exclamation point.
Last time.
But yeah, those are really the reasons the show struggles. And I'm worried it won't get an audience because of the animation and maybe some of the voice acting choices. But who knows? Maybe a good word of mouth will still get a lot of people to give it a shot. I'm very different from many Spider-Man fans. I actually like Tom Holland's version. Hear me out. But I also understand why people don't like Tom Spider-Man. And I have some criticisms towards him too. hate he never made the suit himself until No Way Home, his constant need of Mr. Stark in the first movie, and basically up until Far From Home, hurt Peter's character, and it doesn't make sense character-wise for him. 3, his villains being Tony Stark villains in the first 2 movies, that just happened to be fighting Spider-Man, just hurt so much of what Spider-Man as a character could be. But I love a lot of Tom's Peter. His good heart, which is his want to help the little guy, even though he barely does, and just all along his relatability I'd felt growing up watching him. As a kid, I would have acted the exact same way if I lived in the MCU and Tony Stark showed up at my front door. Spider-Man's biggest strength should be his relatability, and whatever version you relate to the most is most likely going to be your favorite Peter. No person prefers the same Peter, and most of the time when they talk about what they like about that Peter, 9 times out of 10, they're unable to say it's because they relate to that Peter the most. Or nostalgia. That plays a big part too. Now, with that all out of the way, this is how Spider-Man should have been in the MCU. Jesus Christ. This also fully makes my theory that the Peter we have in the MCU is mostly Sony's fault. I'm so tired of people saying it's Marvel's fault that the MCU's Spidey is the way he is. Look what Marvel maybe could have done if Sony didn't make them restrict themselves constantly. I mean, look. We have the actual Osborns in this show. Look! Anyway, I also just like how it flips what we expect from a Spider-Man show on its head. It's familiar, but different, and that's a good thing. Usually when you see Spider-Man stuff, you expect some level of familiarity with your Spider-Man media. But I like how different it feels. How much the story just breathes the Spider-Man maniness while allowing itself to stand out on its own. It allows the concept to be a new thing. I'm so glad we got this version of the show instead of the version we were originally going to get. If you don't know, it was supposed to be just a prequel for Tom's fight Spidey about his first year. If you ask me, that would have kind of sucked. Everything with that version felt more restricted. You couldn't do everything you wanted to do with a Spider-Man show set before Civil War, especially since it's implied he got his powers when he was 15, so he was very young. This show also shows how different Peter might be if Uncle Ben died earlier. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't fully miss Uncle Ben croaking it after the bite. I like the fact that it seems recent enough that it's still affecting Peter and he clearly misses him. Also, it feels like a lot of the lessons Ben left Peter with still shape who he is. So while yes, Uncle Ben's death before the bite is such a different change that a lot of people dislike it, I will say within the story, it works fine enough. I'm not saying make it a habit. Like, if Uncle Ben had died earlier, it also shows that those lessons stayed with him. The creator of the show said this regarding Uncle Ben being killed off: I think Spider-Man fans are conditioned to expect certain things, but one thing I wanted to do here was to make sure Uncle Ben's lessons are something that encapsulate Peter throughout his life. I want to make sure that his presence isn't just from one big lesson, but numerous lessons he's imparted in Peter from the beginning. And I know I already talked about this, but also I want to prove my point on why this show has a lot of good in it. It changes a lot about Peter, but it also adds a lot to him. He's different, but familiar. A lot of this stuff is different, but familiar, and that's what I like about the show. It has that really perfect blend of, like, this is different enough that it's interesting, but familiar enough to where I can expect similar stuff happening. Like with Lonnie Lincoln. He's supposed to become Tombstone, but in the show, they very much are slowly setting it up. It's very different. Usually he's Tombstone right away. We don't really get to see him turn into Tombstone. So it's very cool that we get to see the growth. I'm very excited for that. Like some of the different characters, like Nico Minore from The Runaways showing up. I think she's genuinely a really cool character, and I'm definitely going to be reading some Runaway comics after this. But anyway, here's what he also had to say within that same AMA. Or, well, here's the full question and answer. Let me clarify. I always thought that some kind of broad appeal of Spider-Man is that he struggles with balancing all his real-world responsibilities, just like all of us. Love, work, responsibility, etc. Is there a particular Spider-Man storyline or a character from the multiverse that you drew inspiration from or that you resonated with you the most? Also, I want to say I'm super pumped about this show. And me and the fam love other shows you've worked on, like Ring of the Creek. I agree with the assessment, but there's not one particular version of Spider-Man that I pulled from. Luckily, the character has many decades of history, so I feel like I can borrow a bit from each one to create something that is reminiscent of all of them that is unique in their own way. Seriously, read this whole AMA. This entire thing in this description. This guy literally has such a good understanding of Spider-Man in how to make it different enough that it still feels unique, but it's familiar, and it just works. This finally feels like a Spider-Man that takes a little bit from each era, like he said. And to me, and who knows, I may be proven wrong later, but Spider-Man in the show feels like he will naturally progress through his life in a way not exactly like the comics, but in a way that feels like he might closely resemble the comic book version that I think we've ever gotten. And who knows, maybe with all these differences and similarities, maybe with the black suit being confirmed to be an integral part of the show later on, we might finally get the comic accurate version where it doesn't actually turn him evil and all it does is drain his adrenaline. Like, no, seriously, that's all it did. It was so funny, like, reading that comic for the first time, because most of my Spider-Man comic book reading from when I was a kid was just the 70s and 80s, so going to read the 90s era was all, like, pretty new stuff, even though I'm 21. It's just because that's the stuff my mom grew up reading, so that's what I read. Anyway, sorry. But, like, we might get the actual version of Black Suit. That'd be kind of cool. Like, the one that just drains his adrenaline, and the only reason he wanted it off was really because it would use him to fight crime while he was sleeping, and was an alien, so he got freaked out. And to me, that's what I look forward to the most. Peter in the show is still the same guy I see in every version. A good person who struggles with a lot and knows he's doing what he's doing is right, but it's also, like I said, it's different but familiar. Harry is still the same guy he always is. A kid who feels as if his dad is more obsessed with Peter than him, and that's cool, but he's different in the sense of how he's like a social media influencer and really uber popular instead of just a rich kid who happens to go to the same school as Pete, like in any other adaptation. It's a cool difference that I 100% enjoy. But anyway, back to my main point. This should have been MCU Peter from the start. He has that, I don't know, that Spider-Man spark that Tom didn't get till movie 3. Also, just having him be on his own for at least this season helps it stand out. And yeah, season 2 teased Spider-Gwen, but with how good the writing is in this show, I can't wait to see her in this show. She'll probably be one of the best versions of that character, tied only to Spider-Verse's version. I enjoyed a lot of what this show had to offer. If you look past the animation, this show has genuinely some really great writing. Peter feels like Peter, and the supporting cast is all amazing. Each character has a real arc that'll grow as the show keeps going, and to me, that's where the show stands out. These casts in the MCU felt like they all never grew, never changed. They were comic relief for the movies. The only one who grew from movie 1 to 3 was Peter, and even then it felt like Far From Home repeated a lot of the character growth Peter went through. This also helps the whole Spidey works better as a TV show criticism because, well, he does. Some of the best Spider-Man adaptations are adaptations that are longer than 2 hours, so maybe that's a sign. It allows you to get, basically because it allows you to get more of his character, and the cast grows as well, and a lot of pretty cool stuff. I'm running out of things to say. I do have hopes for this show, and I believe it will be remembered as fondly as one of the good Spider-Man cartoons. I don't think it'll ever hit the level of the peaks of Spectacular Spider-Man and Spider-Man 96, and I don't think it ever will. Even though I loved it and it's a pretty solid show, I can't really see it topping those. And I'm glad that after 2 strikes, after Marvel like fully got the rights to make cartoon Spider-Man stuff again with Disney, I'm glad that they finally made a good Spider-Man show again. And I am hopeful for what is to come if this season is anything to go off of. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. Remember, if you watched me on the other channel, this is a completely different channel, so please subscribe if you haven't yet. This is Alicia is a nerd, not Alicia is your dad. Anyway, take care, have a great day, and bye-bye for now.